In a neighborhood striving to rebuild trust with those who protect it, Officer Brian Decker's world is about to be turned upside down. What begins as a routine patrol leads to a tense encounter with a young boy named Jaden, who's simply trying to make his way home. But in the fallout, Decker finds himself on a journey of self-reflection and accountability as he learns that Jaden's story runs deeper than he ever could have imagined. This is a story of growth, resilience, and the power of community, and how one encounter can change lives forever. Will Officer Decker find redemption? Will Jaden find the peace he deserves? Join us as we follow these characters' journeys and see how a single mural becomes a symbol for an entire community. If you're ready to dive into this powerful story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts below. Do you believe in second chances and the power of community to create change? Hit that bell, and let's get started. Officer Brian Decker adjusted his rearview mirror and glanced down the main street of District 5, his designated patrol area for the evening. It was a typical autumn evening, with leaves drifting lazily from trees that lined the road, their colors shifting from green to amber and crimson. District 5 was a patchwork neighborhood, a mix of modest single-family homes, older apartment buildings, and a handful of small businesses. Decker settled back into his seat, his eyes scanning the street for anything unusual. His partner, Rachel Miller, sat beside him, silently taking notes on her tablet. Decker had been a cop for almost 2 decades, and he'd seen the city change. He'd seen every corner, every street shift in subtle ways over the years. Some streets had fallen into neglect. Others had been revitalized with new parks and community centers. The faces he saw in District 5 were different now too, more diverse, with new cultures, languages, and people bringing life to the area. But in Decker's eyes, that life also brought new problems. He didn't mind change exactly. He just didn't trust it. To him, stability was synonymous with safety. As he drove past a small group of teens hanging around a bus stop, he couldn't stop the flicker of suspicion from creeping into his mind. They were doing nothing more than talking and laughing, one of them balancing on a skateboard, but Decker had learned to be cautious. People change, he thought, but trouble never does. Miller noticed his gaze lingering on the teens. She shifted slightly in her seat, giving him a side glance. "They're probably just waiting for the bus, Brian," she said, her tone mild. Decker didn't respond immediately. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, watching as one of the teens glanced at the patrol car with a mix of curiosity and annoyance. "Maybe," he finally replied, his voice neutral. Miller had only been on the force for a few years, and her idealism often grated on him. She wanted to believe that most people were good, that giving people the benefit of the doubt was as much a part of their job as enforcing the law. Decker respected her commitment, but in his experience, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Sometimes a group of kids is just a group of kids," Miller added, her voice gentle but firm. Decker gave a short nod, keeping his gaze on the road. "Maybe so," he replied, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. He didn't elaborate, and Miller didn't press him. They both knew they saw things differently, and this wasn't the first time they'd been at odds. But as they continued down the road, Decker couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. 13-year-old Jaden Harris adjusted his backpack, trying to ignore the persistent ache in his leg. The cast on his right leg made everything harder, from walking to sitting to even carrying his school books. He'd broken his leg 2 weeks ago during a soccer game, a mistimed jump landing him awkwardly on uneven ground. He'd heard the crack, felt the shock, and knew instantly that he'd be off the field for a while. It wasn't the pain that bothered Jaden now. It was the inconvenience, the way he felt people staring at him when he limped down the street, crutches clicking on the sidewalk. Tonight, he was heading home from his after-school art class, a small but essential part of his routine. Art had always been a way for him to express himself, to explore thoughts and emotions he didn't always have words for. He kept his head down, his eyes focused on the sidewalk ahead, as he maneuvered around a small puddle. The last thing he needed was to slip and make his situation worse. He glanced at the shadows stretching across the street as the sun dipped lower in the sky. It would be dark soon, and he knew his mom would worry if he didn't get home in time. Almost there, he told himself, gripping his crutches a little tighter. A group of kids he knew from school called to him from across the street. They were heading in the opposite direction, laughing and tossing a basketball between them. Jaden smiled, raising one hand in a wave, though he wished he could join them. Being on crutches made him feel separate, like he was standing on the outside looking in. As he continued down the sidewalk, lost in his thoughts, he heard the low hum of a patrol car approaching behind him. He felt a twinge of anxiety and glanced over his shoulder, watching as the car slowed, its headlights casting a glow across the pavement. The car rolled to a stop beside him, and two officers got out, their faces shadowed in the dim light. Officer Decker approached Jaden, his expression unreadable but intent. Beside him, Officer Miller watched, her face softening slightly as she took in Jaden's crutches and the hint of exhaustion in his eyes. "Where are you headed, son?" Decker asked, his voice firm but neutral. Jaden hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He shifted his weight on his crutches, his mind racing as he tried to gauge their intentions. I'm heading home," he replied, his voice steady but laced with a hint of nervousness. "Just a few blocks away." Decker squinted, eyeing the backpack slung over Jaden's shoulder. "Late to be out here by yourself," he remarked, crossing his arms. "What's in the bag?" Jaden blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. "Just art supplies," he said, glancing at Miller, who was watching him with a more understanding expression. He had always been taught to be respectful to police officers, to answer their questions without attitude. But something about Decker's tone felt challenging, as if he were looking for a reason to doubt him. "Mind if we take a look?" Decker asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. Jaden shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his grip on his crutches. Sure, I guess," he said, swinging his backpack around and opening the zipper slowly. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out his sketchbook, pencils, and a small stack of paper. Miller leaned in, glancing at the contents of the bag before nodding at Decker. "Looks like he's telling the truth, Brian." Decker gave a curt nod, but his expression remained guarded. He didn't like being questioned, even implicitly, by his partner. Turning back to Jaden, he forced a thin smile. "Well, make sure you get home safe, all right? It's not a good idea to be out here alone, especially this late." Jaden nodded, relief washing over him as he stuffed his supplies back into his bag. He could feel Miller's gaze on him, sympathetic but distant, as if she wanted to say something more but was holding back. "Thank you, sir. I'll head straight home." Decker nodded, stepping back and motioning for Jaden to continue on his way. As he turned, Jaden caught a brief exchange of glances between Decker and Miller, something he couldn't quite decipher. But he didn't linger. He had no intention of drawing out the encounter any longer than necessary. As he limped away, he felt the weight of their eyes on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't really seen him at all. Jaden's house was a modest, single-story home with a small front yard and a porch swing his mother loved to sit on in the evenings. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow across the front steps as he approached. His mother, Mary, opened the door before he even reached the porch, her eyes filled with relief and concern. "Jaden, you're home." I was starting to get worried. Her gaze dropped to his crutches, and she reached out to steady him as he climbed the steps. "Sorry, Mom. I took a little longer than I planned," he murmured, avoiding her eyes. He didn't want to tell her about the encounter with the police, didn't want to worry her. But the weight of it lingered in his mind, and he knew he wouldn't be able to shake it easily. Mary noticed his distracted expression and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Everything okay?" Jaden hesitated, his mind flashing back to Decker's probing questions, the subtle suspicion in his tone. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said finally, forcing a small smile. "Just tired." She nodded, though her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, as if sensing there was more he wasn't telling her. "All right, honey, why don't you get some rest? You've had a long day." Jaden nodded, grateful for the excuse to retreat to his room. Once inside, he leaned his crutches against the wall and sank onto his bed, letting out a slow breath. He opened his sketchbook, flipping through the pages filled with half-finished drawings and stray thoughts scribbled in the margins. For a moment, he considered sketching the patrol car, the streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and the officers standing over him. But the thought felt too raw, too close to the uneasy feeling that still clung to him. Instead, he closed the book and lay back, staring at the ceiling, wondering why such a simple encounter had left him feeling so unsettled. After finishing his shift, Decker returned to his small apartment, tossing his keys on the counter and sinking into the worn recliner in his living room. The encounter with Jaden played through his mind, but he brushed it off as routine. He'd simply done his job, asked a few questions, and made sure the kid got home safe. But Rachel Miller's expression nagged at him. She hadn't said anything, but the way she'd looked at him had conveyed disappointment, even disapproval. She didn't understand. She was still new, still unscarred by the realities of the job. Decker had learned the hard way that trust was dangerous, that every situation had the potential to go south if he didn't stay on guard. Maybe I was a little harsh, he admitted to himself. But he quickly dismissed the thought. He'd seen too many close calls, too many moments where a seemingly innocent encounter turned on a dime. He'd been a cop long enough to know that vigilance was essential, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down, even for a kid on crutches. Still, as he sat in the quiet of his apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd let something important slip through his fingers. He pushed the thought away, telling himself it was just another night, another call, another face he'd forget by morning. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Mary Harris couldn't shake the sense of unease she felt as she watched her son grow quieter in the days following his encounter with the police. Normally a lively and open child, Jaden had become withdrawn, spending more time in his room with his sketchbook and hardly joining his family for conversations or meals. She remembered the way he'd tried to brush her off that first night he came home, dismissing her questions with an unconvincing smile. She wanted to press him, to find out what had happened, but something told her that Jaden needed space. Still, she couldn't ignore the way he tensed up whenever the topic of school or his walk home came up. On a chilly Saturday afternoon, as she washed dishes at the kitchen sink, she noticed Jaden in the backyard through the window. He was sitting on the porch steps, sketchbook open on his lap, but he wasn't drawing. His gaze was distant, fixed on the crumbling leaves that dotted the lawn. Mary turned off the faucet, wiped her hands, and stepped outside. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Jaden looked up, surprised, then nodded, shifting slightly to make room for her. She sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Jaden, I can tell something's been bothering you," she began, choosing her words carefully. "You know you can talk to me, right? No matter what it is." Jaden hesitated, his fingers brushing over the edge of his sketchbook. I just had a rough day, that's all." "Was it at school?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but unable to hide the worry in her voice. He shook his head, biting his lip. "Not really. It was the police. They stopped me when I was coming home." Mary's heart skipped a beat. She'd heard stories from friends and neighbors about police encounters. Some were minor, but others had left people feeling hurt and humiliated. She hadn't expected her son, a quiet, artistic boy on crutches, to have an experience like that. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. Jaden described the encounter, his voice hesitant at first, but gaining strength as he recounted the way Officer Decker had questioned him, asked to see his backpack, and looked at him with suspicion. He told her about Officer Miller, too, how she'd seemed kinder but hadn't stepped in when Decker started asking questions. Mary listened, her expression unreadable, but inside, a slow anger burned. She knew her son, knew that he was respectful, kind, and careful around authority. The idea that someone could look at him and see a potential threat stirred something fierce and protective within her. "Jaden," she said softly, "I'm sorry you had to go through that, and I'm proud of you for handling it the way you did. But you shouldn't have been put in that position to begin with." Jaden looked down, tracing a pattern on his sketchbook cover. I just want people to see me, Mom, not as trouble or a threat, just as me." Mary pulled him into a hug, feeling the ache of his words. She wanted to shield him from the pain of feeling invisible or misjudged, but she knew that was a reality he'd face again. Still, she resolved that this wouldn't be the end of it. She talked to her husband, Chief Harris, and together, they'd figure out how to make sure Jaden, and every child like him, felt seen and respected. Chief Daniel Harris was accustomed to long work days and late nights. As the new chief of police, he'd spent months reviewing policies, analyzing data, and meeting with community leaders to understand the issues that mattered most to his district. He was keenly aware of the delicate balance between keeping the community safe and maintaining their trust in the police. That evening, he was in his home office, going over paperwork, when Mary knocked softly and stepped inside. He looked up, smiling, but the look on her face made him set down his pen. "Everything okay?" he asked, concerned. Mary took a deep breath, closing the door behind her. "Jaden had an encounter with some of your officers the other night. It's been bothering him ever since." Chief Harris felt a jolt of alarm. "What happened? Is he all right?" "He's fine," Mary assured him, though her expression was still troubled. "But he's shaken. One of your officers stopped him, questioned him on the street, asked to search his bag." Harris leaned back, his jaw tightening. He knew all too well the kinds of assumptions officers sometimes made, often without even realizing it. But the fact that it had happened to his own son, right under his nose, stung more deeply than he could have anticipated. "Who was the officer?" he asked, his voice controlled but tense. Jaden said his name was Officer Decker, Mary replied. There was a female officer too, but she didn't say much. Harris recognized the name. Brian Decker was one of his more experienced officers, known for his thoroughness and professionalism. But he also knew that Decker's approach could come off as harsh, especially if he felt he was dealing with a potential problem. Harris clenched his fists, feeling a rush of frustration. He'd been working tirelessly to bridge the gap between the department and the community, to create an atmosphere of respect. And now, his own son had been made to feel like a suspect in his own neighborhood. "I'll handle it, Mary," he said, his tone firm. "Jaden deserves better than this. And so, does our community." Mary nodded, relief in her eyes. She trusted him to do what was right, not just for their son, but for every family in the district. The next morning, Chief Harris arrived at the precinct earlier than usual. He spent an hour going over reports and preparing for the conversation he knew he needed to have with Officer Decker. He wanted to approach it calmly, to give Decker a chance to explain himself, but he couldn't shake the hurt and anger he felt. When Decker arrived, Harris called him into his office, keeping his expression neutral as he motioned for him to sit. "Morning, Chief," Decker greeted him, looking slightly confused but otherwise at ease. Harris leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. "Decker, I wanted to discuss an encounter you had with a young man on patrol the other night. His name is Jaden Harris." The color drained slightly from Decker's face. He hadn't known that the boy was Harris's son, and he quickly replayed the encounter in his mind, wondering if he'd missed something important. "Yes, sir," he replied, maintaining his composure. "I remember the encounter. The young man was out late, alone, and I felt it was best to check in on him. We had reports of some disturbances in the area." Chief Harris nodded, though his expression remained hard. "Were there any indications that Jaden was involved in any disturbance? Anything that suggested he was a threat?" Decker shifted uncomfortably. "No, sir, nothing specific. But he was carrying a bag, and I wanted to be sure there was nothing suspicious." "Suspicious," Harris repeated, his voice laced with an edge. "Officer Decker, my son was coming home from an art class, carrying nothing but sketchbooks and pencils. Do you think there was any reason to treat him as anything other than an innocent kid?" Decker swallowed, feeling the weight of Harris's gaze. "With respect, sir, my job is to keep the community safe. Sometimes that means asking questions, being cautious. I didn't mean any harm." Chief Harris leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "I understand the need for caution, Decker, but we also have a responsibility to treat people with respect, to see them as individuals, not just potential problems. My son isn't the only one who feels this way. There are countless others in this community who deserve to feel safe and respected when they see one of our officers." Decker nodded, his jaw clenched. "Understood, Chief. I'll be more mindful going forward." Harris let the silence hang for a moment, watching as Decker's initial defensiveness gave way to a more reflective expression. "Thank you, Decker," he said finally. "That's all I ask." As Decker left the office, Harris exhaled slowly. He hoped that this conversation would be the start of something better, not just for Jaden, but for the department and the community he was committed to serving. Over the following days, news of Jaden's encounter with Officer Decker began to circulate within the community. Neighbors and friends shared their own stories of encounters with the police. Some were minor, simple misunderstandings, while others spoke of feeling humiliated or threatened. Mary Harris attended a local community meeting where residents gathered to discuss their experiences and their concerns. The atmosphere was tense, with many expressing frustrations over the lack of accountability in the police department. "We've been patient," one neighbor said, his voice firm but weary. "But we can't keep living like this, wondering if our kids are going to come home safe." Mary nodded, feeling the weight of each story. She knew that change wouldn't come easily, but she also knew that this moment, this shared experience, was an opportunity. With the support of her neighbors, she began organizing a peaceful demonstration, a way to show the police department that the community was watching, that they expected accountability and respect. As the group dispersed that night, Mary felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for Jaden. She was fighting for every child, every family who wanted to feel safe in their own neighborhood. Rachel Miller couldn't shake the feeling of regret that had settled over her since the encounter with Jaden. She'd seen the way Decker had questioned him, the barely concealed suspicion in his tone, and she'd known it was wrong. But she hadn't spoken up, hadn't challenged her partner the way she'd wanted to. She found herself sitting alone in the precinct one afternoon, replaying the moment in her mind. She knew that the community had started organizing, that people were demanding change, and she realized, with a pang of guilt, that she was part of the problem if she continued to stay silent. As she watched Decker pass by her desk, she felt a surge of determination. She knew that if she wanted to be a force for good in the department, she'd have to confront him, honestly and directly. By the time the weekend arrived, word of Jaden's encounter with the police had spread throughout the neighborhood. Mary's friends and neighbors reached out, sharing their own experiences of feeling unfairly scrutinized by law enforcement, some recounting encounters that left them feeling powerless or afraid. The community meeting Mary attended became the first of several, each one drawing more people who wanted their voices heard. As the stories continued to unfold, Mary saw that the issue wasn't isolated to Jaden's experience. Many families recounted how their children felt watched or unsafe, even in places where they should feel most at ease. At one of the gatherings, Mary stood up, feeling the weight of every story pressing down on her. "We all deserve to feel safe here," she said, her voice steady. "This is our home. Our kids deserve to grow up without feeling like they're suspects just for walking down the street." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, people nodding and looking at one another with a mixture of frustration and determination. "Maybe it's time we show them that we're serious," one man said, folding his arms. "If they won't listen to us individually, maybe they'll listen to us together." The idea of organizing a peaceful demonstration quickly gained support. People volunteered to make signs, distribute flyers, and contact local media. Mary's role as a community organizer became crucial, her calm but firm presence helping guide the movement. They scheduled the demonstration for the following Saturday. Mary knew it wouldn't be a simple fix, but as she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Jaden. It was about making their voices heard, about laying the foundation for change. Officer Brian Decker couldn't shake the sense of discomfort that had lingered since his conversation with Chief Harris. He knew the chief was disappointed in him, and though he'd initially tried to brush it off, something about the chief's words had stuck with him. Back at the precinct, Decker noticed the way some of his colleagues glanced at him. He couldn't tell if they were judging him or sympathizing, and it left him feeling oddly exposed. The atmosphere in the precinct was tense, and even though no one had directly questioned him, he could feel the weight of silent scrutiny. One evening after his shift, Decker ran into Officer Rachel Miller in the break room. She had always been vocal about her views on respectful policing, and though she hadn't confronted him about the encounter with Jaden, he could sense her disapproval. "Brian," she began, her voice steady but cautious, "do you ever think about how we come across the people out there?" Decker looked up from his coffee, a flash of irritation crossing his face. "What are you getting at, Rachel?" Miller sighed, choosing her words carefully. "That night with Jaden, I don't think we handled it the way we should have. I think we came across as, well, more aggressive than necessary." Decker set his coffee down, feeling a surge of defensiveness. "I was doing my job. You know as well as I do that we have to be cautious. Anyone could be a threat. Anyone, or everyone." Miller's tone was soft but pointed, her gaze unwavering. "Brian, not everyone out there is out to cause trouble. Sometimes they just need a little understanding." Decker felt his defenses falter slightly, but he pushed back. "We're here to keep people safe, Rachel. I'm not going to apologize for doing my job." Miller nodded, disappointment flickering across her face. "Maybe it's not about an apology, Brian. Maybe it's about asking yourself why you felt the need to treat that boy like a suspect. And if you don't want to ask yourself that, maybe you were in the wrong line of work." With that, she turned and walked out of the break room, leaving Decker alone with his thoughts. Her words echoed in his mind, lingering long after she'd left. For the first time, he began to wonder if there was truth in her criticism. Jaden's encounter with the police continued to haunt him, but he poured his energy into his art as a way of coping. His sketchbook became an outlet for the confusion and frustration he felt. He drew scenes from his neighborhood, but the images were layered with shadows and lines, showing both the beauty of his world and the unease that now tinged it. His mother, Mary, noticed the change in his drawings. Gone were the bright, carefree sketches he'd once filled his pages with. Instead, his work had taken on a darker, more introspective tone, reflecting the tension he felt but struggled to express. One evening, Mary sat beside him as he worked on a new piece. "That's powerful, Jaden," she said softly, studying the image of a cityscape half-shrouded in darkness. "You're really capturing something real." Jaden shrugged, keeping his gaze fixed on the paper. "It's just how things feel, I guess." Mary reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Art can be a way of healing, a way to make sense of things that don't always make sense." Jaden nodded, his expression thoughtful. He still felt the weight of what had happened, but he was beginning to find strength in expressing himself. He wanted to use his art not just to work through his own feelings, but to share his experience with others. With his mother's encouragement, he decided to start a mural project at the community center, something that would represent the community's resilience. It was a small step, but it gave him a sense of purpose, a way to turn pain into something constructive. The day of the demonstration arrived, and the community gathered at the local park, signs in hand, voices filled with determination. Families, friends, and neighbors came together, unified by a common purpose. Some held signs that read, "Respect our community" and "Justice for all," while others simply stood, holding hands in silent solidarity. Mary took her place at the front of the crowd, feeling the weight of the moment. She hadn't imagined herself as a leader in this way, but she knew this was something she had to do. For her son, for her neighbors, for all the families who had ever felt like outsiders in their own city. As the crowd marched through the streets, chanting and calling for respect, a few local journalists snapped photos and took notes. Mary saw Jaden walking beside her, his crutches clicking with each step, and felt a surge of pride. At the center of the crowd, she paused to address everyone. "We're here because we love our community," she began, her voice strong and clear. "We want to see it thrive. We want to feel safe, respected, and valued. And we're here to remind everyone that respect goes both ways." The crowd erupted in applause, their unity and determination creating a sense of solidarity. They marched together, showing the city that they were more than just individuals. They were a community, a force to be reckoned with. From his office window, Chief Harris watched the demonstration unfold, his heart filled with a mixture of pride and concern. He admired the courage it took for his wife, son, and neighbors to stand up for their rights. But he also knew this moment put pressure on him to address the underlying issues within the department. Later that evening, he called Decker back into his office. This time, Decker arrived with a more subdued expression, the weight of the community's response clearly affecting him. Harris motioned for him to sit, his tone calm but firm. "I saw the demonstration today, Decker. I saw the people who came out to demand respect and accountability." Decker nodded, his eyes dropping. I didn't expect it to get this big." That's part of the problem, Harris replied, his voice measured. People are tired of feeling like their voices don't matter. They're tired of feeling like they have to prove their worth just to be treated fairly. Decker's shoulders slumped, his defensiveness slowly giving way to a sense of remorse. Chief, I never meant to make anyone feel that way. I thought I was doing my job. There's more to this job than caution, Decker. There's respect. There's empathy, Harris said, leaning forward. And that means seeing people as individuals, not just as potential threats. Decker felt the sting of those words, each one landing with uncomfortable clarity. He thought of Jaden, the quiet boy on crutches, who had been going home with nothing but art supplies. And he thought of Rachel Miller's words, her disappointment in his actions. I want to do better, Decker said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I don't want to be the kind of officer who people fear. Harris nodded, his expression softening. Then show the community you're willing to listen. Attend the workshops we're setting up. Learn from the people you serve. That's the only way forward. Decker left the office that night with a heavy heart, but also with a newfound determination. For the first time, he was beginning to see the path toward change, not just for himself, but for the entire community. The next day, Rachel Miller found Decker in the precinct's break room. She noticed the weariness in his expression, the uncharacteristic quietness in his demeanor. She took a deep breath, deciding to extend an olive branch. Brian, she said gently, I just wanted to say, I'm glad you're open to change. Decker looked up, surprised. I don't know if I deserve that. I messed up, Rachel, and now I have to own up to it. She nodded, her gaze compassionate but firm. That's a start. But remember, this isn't about one mistake. It's about what you do next, about whether you're willing to learn from this. Decker met her gaze, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I'm ready. For the first time, Miller offered him a small smile. Then let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Not just for Jaden, but for everyone in this community. The following week, Officer Decker arrived at the first community workshop, an initiative led by Chief Harris to address implicit biases within the department and foster more respectful relationships with the community. As Decker entered the meeting room, he noticed several familiar faces, community members who had been at the demonstration, including Mary Harris. The room was set up with rows of chairs facing a panel table, and Decker felt the weight of being outnumbered by civilians in a place he usually considered his own turf. He took a seat in the back, feeling an uneasy mixture of apprehension and defensiveness. He'd agreed to attend, but he wasn't sure how much he'd actually change. How much can a few conversations really alter anything? The workshop facilitator, a local community activist named Carmen Lee, opened the session with a few ground rules. We're here to listen, to learn, and to engage respectfully, she said, her voice calm but commanding. We're not here to blame or accuse. We're here to make sure everyone feels heard and understood. As the workshop began, Carmen invited several community members to share their experiences with law enforcement. The stories that followed were deeply personal and often painful. A middle-aged man spoke about being pulled over repeatedly, even in his own neighborhood. A young woman recounted how she'd been searched and questioned while walking to her job, all because of the neighborhood she lived in. Decker sat silently, listening as each story unfolded. With every word, he felt his defenses begin to waver, the habitual justifications he'd relied on seeming increasingly hollow. He hadn't considered how his actions might feel to the people on the receiving end, hadn't realized how deeply they could affect someone's sense of safety and self-worth. Toward the end of the session, Carmen opened the floor for officers to respond. Decker remained quiet, unsure if anything he could say would be enough. But as he glanced around, he caught Rachel Miller's eye. Her expression was encouraging, almost as if she were willing him to step forward. Hesitating, he finally raised his hand. I've been a cop for almost 20 years, he began, his voice low. And I thought I understood people, thought I knew what this job was all about. But hearing these stories, I realized there's a lot I haven't seen. He felt a rush of emotion as he spoke, the weight of his words settling over the room. He hadn't expected to feel so vulnerable, hadn't expected to feel as though he were finally seeing himself clearly. I don't want to be the officer people fear. I want to be better than that. As he sat down, He felt a quiet resolve take hold. This was only the first step, but he knew he had to keep going. Meanwhile, Jaden's mural project had begun to take shape. With support from the community center, he'd been given a large wall near the entrance, a blank canvas waiting to be transformed. His vision for the mural was clear, a powerful piece that would represent resilience, community, and the journey from pain to hope. He spent hours planning the mural, sketching out ideas, experimenting with colors and patterns. With every stroke, he felt a sense of release, the emotions from the past few weeks finding expression in his art. The mural became more than just a project. It was a way for him to process everything he'd been through. One afternoon, Mary joined him at the community center, watching as he worked. "You're really putting your heart into this, Jaden," she said, her voice filled with pride. Jaden looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's helping, Mom. I don't know, it just feels like I'm putting something back together." Mary nodded, understanding. Art has a way of doing that. It lets us take what's broken and turn it into something whole again. They stood in silence for a moment, admiring the mural as it started to take shape. Jaden was painting a series of hands reaching upward, interwoven with images of his neighborhood. The trees, the streetlights, the faces of people he knew. It was his way of reclaiming his identity, of showing the world that he was more than just a kid with a crutch, more than someone who'd been judged unfairly. In those quiet moments, Jaden felt a renewed sense of strength. He wasn't just healing himself, he was helping to heal his community too. Decker attended each workshop with an increasing sense of purpose, though the journey was far from easy. Each session forced him to confront aspects of himself that he'd avoided, long-held biases and assumptions that he'd never questioned. The workshops were raw, at times painful, but they were also a catalyst for change. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, he sat alone in the precinct's locker room, his mind swirling with thoughts. He remembered a story shared by one of the workshop participants, a teenager who'd been stopped and questioned outside his own home. Decker closed his eyes, feeling the shame creep in. He'd never considered how his actions might feel to a young person like Jaden, someone just trying to live his life without being treated as a suspect. The door to the locker room creaked open, and Rachel Miller walked in, stopping when she saw him. "Brian," she said gently, "you okay?" He looked up, managing a weak smile. "Honestly, Rachel, I don't know. Feels like everything I thought I knew is being turned upside down." She sat beside him, her expression compassionate. "That's part of growth, Brian. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Decker nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude toward her. For the first time, he felt that he wasn't alone in this journey, that someone was willing to walk beside him as he tried to make things right. With encouragement from Chief Harris, Decker reached out to Mary and Jaden to arrange a meeting. He wanted to apologize to Jaden again, this time from a place of deeper understanding. Mary agreed, though she made it clear that she didn't expect forgiveness. When they met at a small park near the community center, Decker was struck by how much younger and more vulnerable Jaden seemed outside of the police context. He wasn't just a name in a report or a figure on the street. He was a child, a member of a family, a person with hopes and dreams. He knelt down to Jaden's level, his voice steady but sincere. "Jaden, I want to tell you again how sorry I am. I know my actions hurt you, and I know I can't change what happened. But I want you to know that I'm trying to learn from this. I want to be the kind of officer who respects people, not someone they fear." Jaden met his gaze, his expression thoughtful. He could see the honesty in Decker's eyes, the weight of his words. After a moment, he nodded. "Thank you. I can see that you're trying." Decker's heart lifted, though he knew it was only a beginning. He didn't expect Jaden to trust him immediately, but this acknowledgement felt like a step forward, a moment of connection he would carry with him. The mural project continued, and Jaden's work began to attract attention from local residents. People stopped by to watch, some offering to help with painting, others simply sharing their appreciation for his work. Jaden felt proud of what he was creating, of the way his art was bringing people together. One day, as he was working on a section depicting a sunrise over the neighborhood, Decker approached him, carrying a small can of paint. "Mind if I lend a hand?" Jaden looked at him, surprised, but he nodded. "Sure." They worked side by side, the silence between them comfortable but meaningful. As they painted, Decker shared stories from his early years on the force. Moments when he'd felt uncertain, times when he'd questioned his own decisions. "People think cops don't feel doubt," Decker said, his voice soft. "But we do. We just don't always admit it." Jaden glanced over, absorbing Decker's words. "I think doubt can be a good thing," he replied. "It means you're thinking, that you care." Decker smiled, feeling the truth of Jaden's words. "You're right, Jaden. And I'm trying to make sure that doubt leads me to do better." As they continued painting, the wall transformed not just into a mural, but into a symbol of connection, a testament to the power of growth and mutual respect. For Jaden, it was a reminder of his strength. For Decker, it was a sign of the path he hoped to follow, one of humility and empathy. Over the weeks that followed, Decker became more involved in the community. He attended neighborhood events, volunteered at the community center, and began building relationships with residents he'd once viewed with suspicion. The journey was slow, filled with moments of awkwardness and vulnerability, but each step felt like a small victory. One afternoon, Chief Harris approached him in the precinct, a look of pride in his eyes. "I see the work you're doing out there, Brian," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I'm proud of you." Decker nodded, his expression serious. "Thank you, Chief. I'm just trying to make things right." Harris nodded, his gaze understanding. "It's never too late to do the right thing, Brian, and it's never too late to change." Decker felt a surge of determination. He knew he'd made mistakes, but he was committed to learning, to becoming a part of the community rather than standing apart from it. Several weeks into the series of workshops, the police department and community center organized a final public forum, inviting officers, residents, and community leaders to discuss the changes they hoped to see moving forward. Chief Harris took charge of organizing the event, knowing it would be an opportunity to show both sides that their voices mattered and that meaningful change was underway. The forum took place in a large hall, with rows of chairs arranged in a circle to foster open dialogue. Jaden, Mary, Officer Decker, and several of Jaden's friends sat together, along with a mix of other residents and officers. When the discussion began, Chief Harris welcomed everyone, his voice calm but passionate. "We've been through a lot as a community," he said, addressing the room. "We've faced hard truths, and we've had difficult conversations. But we're here because we believe in each other, in the possibility of building something better together." As people took turns speaking, sharing their concerns, hopes, and ideas for the future, the atmosphere shifted from tense to hopeful. One by one, residents voiced their desire for a community where trust and respect flowed both ways. When it was Decker's turn to speak, he took a deep breath, standing up to address the room. He looked around, meeting the eyes of both officers and civilians. "Growing up, I thought being a police officer was about protecting people," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I believe it was a way to do good, to make a difference. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. I got so focused on suspicion that I forgot to see people as individuals, as part of this community." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm committed to changing, to making sure that the way I interact with people reflects the respect and care that they deserve. And I'm grateful to those of you who have shared your experiences with me. You've opened my eyes in ways I never expected." As he sat down, a ripple of quiet support spread through the crowd. Decker had said his piece, and he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He'd never be able to change the past, but he knew he was taking steps to build a better future. The day of Jaden's mural dedication arrived with clear skies and a bright sun overhead. The community center was filled with residents, friends, family members, and even local journalists who had come to see the mural and hear from Jaden himself. The mural, a sprawling and colorful piece depicting resilience and unity, had become a symbol of the community's strength and hope. Jaden stood nervously by the mural, his hands clasped in front of him. He glanced at his mom, who gave him an encouraging nod, and at Decker, who stood nearby, watching with a mixture of pride and respect. When it was his turn to speak, Jaden stepped forward, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "This mural represents our community," he began, gesturing to the painted hands, sunrises, and street scenes he'd worked so hard to bring to life. "It's about facing our challenges together and choosing to create something positive, even when things feel broken. He paused, scanning the faces of the crowd. We've been through a lot, and I know there's still a lot to do. But I believe that if we keep working together, we can make things better for everyone. The crowd erupted into applause, and Jaden felt a surge of pride as he looked at the mural. It was more than just a piece of art. It was a message to himself, to the community, and to the officers who protected it. It was a reminder that they could rise above their struggles and move forward as one. As he stepped back, Decker approached him, offering a handshake that quickly turned into a warm embrace. "You've inspired us all, Jaden," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." In the weeks following the mural dedication, Decker and Jaden continued to cross paths, working together on community projects and youth programs. Decker became a regular at the community center, volunteering to lead activities and connecting with residents in a way he'd never done before. One day, as Decker was organizing supplies for a youth program, Jaden approached him with an idea. "Officer Decker," he began, a shy smile on his face. "What if we start an art program here for other kids? You know, something where they can express themselves and talk about what's on their minds?" Decker considered the idea, his face lighting up. "I think that's a great idea, Jaden. Art helped you, and maybe it can help others too. Let's make it happen." Together, they put plans in motion for a youth art program, one that would allow kids from the community to explore their creativity while also providing a safe space to discuss their thoughts and experiences. The project quickly gained support, and soon, kids from all over the neighborhood were signing up. Through this program, Decker began to see the world through the eyes of the youth he worked with, understanding the challenges they faced and the importance of creating a supportive environment. Each conversation, each piece of art became a bridge between him and the community, allowing him to earn the trust he had once taken for granted. One evening after a workshop, Mary and Decker found themselves standing by the community center's entrance, watching as people filtered out into the cool night air. They'd exchanged polite greetings before, but this was the first time they'd been alone since the incident with Jaden. "Thank you, Officer Decker," Mary said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity, "for everything you've done for Jaden and for our community." Decker met her gaze, humbled by her words. "Mary, I don't know if I'll ever deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing things right. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to make amends." She nodded, her expression softening. Forgiveness isn't always about letting go of the past. It's about building a better future. And from what I've seen, you're already helping us do that. The two stood in comfortable silence, both feeling a sense of closure and the beginnings of mutual respect. In that moment, Decker realized that he wasn't just working to gain the community's trust. He was becoming a part of it. With the mural complete and the youth art program underway, Jaden felt more confident than he had in months. His experiences had taught him about strength, resilience, and the power of community, and he carried those lessons with him everywhere he went. At school, he became more involved in art projects, and his teachers noticed the change in him. He was no longer the quiet kid who kept to himself. He was a leader, someone who inspired others with his work and his courage. One afternoon, his art teacher approached him, a proud smile on her face. "Jaden, would you be interested in sharing your story with other students? I think you could make a real difference." Jaden nodded, feeling a spark of excitement. "I'd like that," he replied, imagining the impact he could have on others who might be struggling to find their voice. The community itself began to feel the effects of the changes taking root. Relationships between residents and officers improved, with regular meetings, forums, and workshops fostering open dialogue and accountability. People began to feel safer, more connected, and more hopeful about the future. Chief Harris continued to implement new policies within the department, ensuring that officers were trained not only in law enforcement, but also in empathy, communication, and cultural awareness. The department became a model for community policing, a testament to what could be achieved when people were willing to work together. The community's transformation wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to overcome. But as people looked around, they saw the positive changes, the ways they'd come together to create a safer, more inclusive environment. Years passed, and the changes that had begun with Jaden's mural and Decker's transformation became a part of the community's identity. Jaden's mural remained a symbol of resilience, its colors vibrant and full of life, a reminder of the journey they'd all taken together. Decker retired from the force, but he continued to volunteer at the community center, mentoring young people and sharing the lessons he'd learned. He was no longer just an officer. He was a trusted member of the community, someone who had earned his place through humility and dedication. Jaden went on to study art, his passion for creativity and expression deepening over the years. He returned to the community often, leading workshops for kids just as he had once envisioned. His art and his story continued to inspire others, showing them that they could overcome adversity and create something beautiful from their struggles. Together, Jaden and Decker had created a legacy that would last for generations, a legacy of respect, accountability, and unity. The community they'd helped to build was stronger than ever, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human spirit. In the years that followed, Jaden's community became a place known for its unity, where officers and residents worked side by side to keep each other safe and uplifted. The mural had inspired others to create art, and soon, new murals appeared across the neighborhood, each one telling a story of strength, togetherness, and hope. One day, Jaden returned to his old neighborhood to lead a workshop for a group of young artists. As he stood in front of the mural, he saw Decker in the crowd, smiling proudly. Jaden felt a surge of gratitude, knowing that he wouldn't be where he was today without the journey they'd taken together. He began his workshop with a simple message. Art has the power to heal, to inspire, and to bring us together. No matter what challenges we face, we can always choose to create something beautiful. And with that, Jaden led the group in painting a new mural, a continuation of the story they'd started years before. A story of growth, resilience, and a community that had learned to move forward together. Thank you so much for following along with this powerful story of resilience, growth, and community. If you enjoyed this journey and want to see more stories like it, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any new content. Your support means a lot, and we can't wait to share more stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.